I grew up during what I call the dark ages of documentary, which was the period of the late 30s, 40s, and 50s, where synchronous sound, which had become, you see, there was a period in documentary when you went out and you made silent films and you put commentary over it and you laid music over it. You hired Virgil Thompson or Aaron Copland or some fancy guy like that. And you've probably seen those films. The Plow That Broke the Plane, da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. Wheat will win the war, wheat will blah, 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 blah. Wheat for the British, wheat for the French, wheat will win the war. Da-dum, ba-da-bum, ba-da-bum, bum, ba-bum, ba-bum, ba-bum. It was sort of a grocery list, and you could very easily actually edit these together. Now I'm being very negative. Some marvelous films were made this way, and I was very, very impressed with it at the time. But then, around 1936, in my experience, I was still in England, John Grierson came up with the notion that and everybody was aware of it, even Charlie Chaplin, you had to have synchronous sound.
It took 3 men to carry the camera in boxes and assemble it and so forth, and there were cables all over the place, and there was this guy with clapsticks. If you had been able to get a candid moment with anybody, those clapsticks would have frozen up the character right there, and it was just technically impossible.
So we had the notion that which has always been the notion of documentary film, of going out, you know, Vertov talked about it, Tolstoy everybody talked about it. Nobody could do it. Vertov couldn't do it.
About what?
About the idea of capturing life as it really is.
Following events on the run. They talked about following events on the run. Vertov had talked about following events on the run. In fact, the phrase cinema verite is simply a translate of kino pravda. Kino pravda means cinema verite, film truth. And his idea was, he articulated in those terms was to follow an event on the run without interfering with it. And that's what the early kino...
I got the money and I got the talent put together to cut that equipment down, to make it lightweight, make it work without wires and so forth. And I was finally ready in early 1960 and began looking around for the first story on which we could use this equipment and begin to shoot candidly. There was a young senator who was running for president, and I liked him, and in fact he fit a kind of wonder that I had about politics at the time, and still do. And when I saw Kennedy walk out on that stage with his confident man, conviction and his certitude, this young man thought he could see it all and he could manage it. And I was thunderstruck by the guy, the fact that we could make a film about this man and maybe record what happened, whatever happened. And those are some of the ways that I got aimed at the subject of a primary in Wisconsin.
Primary was the first film where it began to work. And we thought when we went out to make Primary that we were going, I think Drew said we were going to capture the decision-making process in politics. Well, we'd never gone anywhere near that. And I don't think anybody ever will. Maybe they will, I doubt it. Politicians are too goddamn sleazy, complicated, dishonest, or smart to ever allow that. But we did get, I think, and Jean-Luc Godard said at the time, he said, if you want to find out about the primary process, read Teddy White's book. Don't look at Leacock's and Drew's movie. And, you know, it's perfectly right. I think that he was wrong in that if you wanted to know the feel of a primary, the smell of it, don't read Teddy White, look at our movie.
To the people who were running in the campaign, we'll never ask you to go through that revolving door again or to enter that room again. We won't ask you to repeat actions. All we want is access. We just want to be able to be with you as you go to meetings and so on, and to shoot what's going on. We want you to ignore us, and we'll ignore you except to shoot whatever you record, whatever you're doing.
Well, Kennedy, and you got a producer with a tripod following you, and he says, come on, one of you can drive in the car with me. It's not going to be the producer and the tripod. It'll be you and the camera. You took your chances on a shaky camera, and you tried to hold it steadier if you could. So that it didn't begin with the idea of let's have shaky camera because the other is no good. It's just let's get into the room anyhow. If we get in the room, we'll get something that nobody's gotten before, and the only way we can get in the room is no tripod, screw the tripod. That's not interesting. So then people began associating cinema verite with shaky cameras and bad focus and all those things.
They'll never make CDS unless he really brings it.
The trend is becoming clear. Senator Humphrey's early lead from the rural areas is being wiped out as the big city vote comes in.
I think that the films I make are as different from documentary as they are from fiction. Maybe they're more different from documentary. They're closer to fiction. Because in a way, what I'm trying to do is to go into real lives and produce fictional roles, because that's how I have to edit them. I have to make, I mean, I can't take a whole person's life. I have to take a slice. I start here and end here. And that slice has to give you a sense of having watched sufficient to understand something. You see what I mean? Which is what fiction does. It's what good poetry does. It says, I'm not going to show you this whole person's life because you haven't got time to sit and read it, but I'm going to show you enough.
Documentary filmmaking in a verite, which takes advantage of the power that is possible in verite, will do what the movies do. Find interesting characters caught up in lines of action which have inherent interest.
Documentary of integrity reveals to you a world with lots of loose ends where there are no simple solutions to things. And the whole job of fiction is to present an imagined world in which everything has a cause and effect, in which there is a solution. The problem is solved usually at the end. I mean, that's what popular fiction is. It solves problems. A social problem is solved by catching and killing some wicked person. There is a resolution, and it is a world in which things make sense in terms of cause and effect. The documentarist is constantly presenting to them a much neater world, a much more unneat world, in which is full of loose ends, and which is not very satisfying because there's really no solution to most problems.
Start with the impossible and find a way to solve it. With more or less success. But I'm very leery of going into something where I know all the answers.
All I knew was that Kennedy was entering a situation which had a structure. He would run for an office and he would win or lose. Hubert Humphrey, the same thing. Two contrasting characters, two parallel lines of action. They could be intercut and there would be a climax. I mean, it had the structure of a film, of a movie. And unlike a documentary film in which people interview each other endlessly and in which you try to arrive at some point or don't even care if you arrive at some particular point, this was going to arrive at election eve.
Senator, good evening. How did the evening look to you?
All these election nights are. It's a very interesting evening.
How has the vote been thus far shaped up according to your expectations?
Well, I was hopeful we could take 6 districts. I think we have a good chance to do that. It would give us, I hope, in the majority of the popular vote, because we can make a very good result.
Senator, how do you feel about this exhaustive campaign?
Long campaign, many months, but I think we were successful by running against a very hard-working, formidable opponent. My colleague and friend, Senator Humphrey, I can be successful against him. I'll be delighted, particularly in Wisconsin, which is, of course, the obvious west next to Minnesota, so we have all through the campaign.
What are your plans after tonight?
Well, they continue on in Maine, and I hit West Virginia, Maryland, and Oregon, and Nebraska, all in a short space of 2.5 weeks. It makes good.
Well, you wait a little while and they smile even more. Well, my goodness. The voice of America, I'm always glad to say something for it. This has been a great election. And the people of Wisconsin will be congratulated on their genuine interest in this election.
I'm working on a memory here, but, but 3 of my films will run in a Paris cinema. A primary, On the Pole, and a film about Africa. Kenya Part 1. And the French critics liked them. That is, they gave them fantastic ratings. And people went to see them, and they created a stir. And the French, about that time, had some filmmakers, Jean Rouch and Chris Marker, who were making films of a different sort. That is, John Rouch would walk down the street with a camera and accost people with questions. And they thought, the French thought that was a breakthrough too. So they called his work Cinema Verite, and they called our work Cinema Verite. And if you can imagine anything more different from accosting people with a camera on the street and shooting what really happens in a story. But so from the beginning, Cinema Verite has meant almost nothing because it meant too many things.
That leads to all the confusion involved in the word cinema verite. You see, because in my book I separated as the observer cinema, which is like direct cinema, in which you are as closely as possible not interfering and are simply acting as an observer, which is not very possible in very private situations. It is in highly public situations. And then I separate that from what I call the catalyst cinema, in which you are precipitating an action, in which you're really creating an activity and then following it to its conclusion. And that's what Jean Rouch is doing.
Cinema Verite, my work, had, if I'd been smarter at some point, I might have provided a name which would say a documentary, but not the old kind of documentary, and not the verbal lecture documentary, and not the interview documentary, but a documentary that would tell a story with characters that would have, maybe I could have just the word cinema verite, but I just deal with it because it sits there. People seem to use it.
I never call it anything because it doesn't seem to me that's my business to call it anything. I certainly accept it. If everybody says, oh, you make cinema verite, I'm not going to have an argument with them in the middle of the street.
You asked me to define what we think we're doing, and I've tried to define it. That whatever it is you want to call it, I hate cinema verite.
How about living camera?
Oh, I don't know.
Let's make one up right now.
Movies.
Okay.
What we get usually is aspects of the filmmaker's perception, and by filmmaker I mean probably 2 people working together, of the filmmaker's perception of what happened in the presence of a camera. That sounds rather dry, but I tried to make it fairly accurate. Now, there's a tendency these days, my friend Penny and a lot of other people have been, because of the silly discussions about is it the absolute truth or not. Obviously it's not. It's highly selective. It's aspects of my perception, of our perception. But to say that that's the same as an acted, scripted film is, to me, ludicrous. It isn't.
Well, do you think there's a difference of what Verite filmmakers claim to do and what is actually done? It's especially
There's a lot of cheating. There's getting more and more cheating.
But why do they bother? Why do they bother even raising that argument when you know it'll take
Because broadcast television, which is a national, international disaster as far as I'm concerned, as far as the kind of films I want to make, all they care about is the ratings, and all they care about is coming home with the bacon. They don't give a shit how you get it. They just want something sensational. And I'm beginning to think that documentaries, that damn few made anymore, are measured and judged in terms of how many adult males weep in the film. A weeping adult male seems to be a good thing.
I think that the Verite films that I see are generally don't have structure, don't have story, don't have, they do have often character. But back that term, but well, Verite is misleading in that it promises the truth, right? I don't think any of us should get hung up on the word truth, because what each of us is doing, putting across our view of the truth. Now, that's separate from the fact that we record it as it happened. Recording it as it happens without impinging on it, there is a truth at that moment.
Does the camera affect the action?
Well, yeah, and
I always get this thrown at me, and when walks in the room, does that third person affect what you do?
Well, what about the editing? How would...
Well, the editing is always somebody's view, and I think what I can say about the editing of the early Drew films is that for people and feeling for what was true from their standpoint. And
From their standpoint,
yeah,
not from your standpoint.
well,
Well, I mean, what about
Oh,
the Ku Klux Klan? Or what if you didn't like Kennedy? Would you still, you know?
well, I didn't make films on people I didn't like. That is, I didn't make films on people I hated.
Eyes for the least, I mean, if you never affected the situation at all, you'd finally come down to what's his name, Candid Camera.
The presence of the camera has something to do with what you get, even though it has a marvelous spontaneous quality and is giving you insight into something that you don't usually aware of.
He was elected, and before he came in West Palm Beach and showed him primary and told him that this new form of history could be used to record the presidency in a new way.
The White House filming him. I don't know why. And when people tried to throw me out of the White House, which they did on a couple of occasions because they didn't think I belonged there, and they thought, particularly, the press thought I didn't belong there, but even members of Kennedy's, immediate people thought I shouldn't be there because I was exposing things that shouldn't be known publicly. He always arranged that I could get back in, unbeknownst to them. So I never say to him, why do you do this? If it's an hour to a psychiatrist and it's 3 o'clock and that's when you begin and you're sitting in his office, do you stare out the window? I mean, what do you do? In other words, the fact that you're there under that particular peculiar arrangement makes you begin to do something. In other words, you initiate some kind of action. Why? To interest him? Maybe, but actually to interest yourself. You're trying to find out something. You don't know how else to do it. A person with this kind of process moving through their lives with them for some period, and usually it has to be a period that matters. You just can't hang out with somebody dauntlessly. I mean, you overwhelm them. It's too heavy a process. But if somebody is moving around some corner or getting into something in their lives, and this process is there, they are going to enact their lives as it interests them, not you. Your film doesn't interest them much.
The print press resented it. The networks didn't understand it. And so I suppose with anything new, you have a certain amount of incomprehension.
It was a revolution, a genuine
Do you
revolution.
think it was really ideological?
No, it allowed us to do things that we couldn't dream of doing before. And it seemed like we had opened up a limitless that forever we would be able to make fantastic films. Hasn't worked out that way.
The New York Times recently wrote an article in which they chose to quote me as saying we failed. And the line is not exactly in context, but here's what we failed to do. We failed to program 52 weeks a year of this stuff with sufficient quality to pull an audience that would pay for the effort. Now, that's a tall order. Nobody's ever done it any other way either. So yes, Cinema Verite has gotten off the ground in that a number of masterpieces have been made, and a masterpiece is a masterpiece. I don't care when it doesn't matter whether it was broadcast even. If it's made, it's a fantastic achievement, and there are a number of those.
I am more excited by whatever I can find than anything I can invent, because I think there are extraordinary things to be found in the way of films, sights and sounds, etc., and that's what, in general, what motivates the documentarist. Also, by a feeling that his job is to make people aware of something they haven't been aware of before, and rather vividly. And there are a lot of those things, because what commercial television especially is likely to concentrate on is those things that will interest sponsors. In other words, anything that contributes to an optimistic feeling about business, the business of being a consumer. There's very little in the way of television entertainment that's in any way discouraging or makes you feel that we have a lot of problems to overcome.
Is there
A problem on television fiction is usually overcome by the end of the program, and that's why it almost always is a piece of personal villainy of some kind, and so that all social problems are reduced to personal malefactors. Now that's an artificial view of the world, and very few problems can be explained that way. And one of our national problems is that we try to solve international problems by saying this country is the villain, this country is the hero, and we put all our money behind the villain, behind the hero, against the villain. This hero-villain interpretation pervades our fiction, and documentary is a little more complicated.
What I felt was that there was a kind of an intensity missing in film that you can only get by going into real action, real life. And whether it was a real life performance or a real life person. And that's kind of what I've tried to do. I don't see that it's changed much. I don't think the audience, well, in certain ways, there's a critical audience that's expanded for it. I don't think the general audience is expanded for it. Oddly enough, what has expanded for it for no particular logic is suddenly people and things that I filmed in the 60s that at the time nobody was interested in at all. Now, of course, they pay just disgusting amounts of money to use in some film that I don't even want to watch because nobody else filmed them. So what we have is a sense is records, historical records of people and certain kinds of things that nobody else has just because I did it. That wasn't why I did it. And we're always constantly trying to use that material for ourselves in our own way. But I don't think that the idea of, I don't think much has changed, and I wouldn't expect it to anyway.
During the Droop period, those were in a sense, the obvious ones. Is Jack Kennedy going to be president? Whatever. And we started, all of us, to get away from that. Because it became a formula. You don't want to always have
There's a runoff of physical laws, the way airplanes are built when you understand gravity or something. You know, that's not. I think it's much less understood than that by especially the practitioners. Which doesn't mean they may not know what they're doing. It's just they can't explain it.
Do you think that's why there's so much discussion over what is cinema verite or direct cinema?
No, I think you have a lot of people that like to talk about filmmaking. That's why this discussion. I don't think the people who make them know what to talk about.
I mean, it seems like apparent from the literature that I've read that Leacock and yourself have adopted this label, saying, "Oh yes, we're part of the cinema verite movement."
Never. I never said that. Where have I ever said that?
Well, I was reading Barneau, and he labeled all of you.
He labeled it, but I never. I'll tell you where the word came from. The word